A reading from the Gospel according to Luke. Now during those days, Jesus went out to the mountain to pray, and he spent the night in prayer to God. And when day came, he called his disciples and chose 12 of them, whom he also named apostles: Simon, whom he named Peter, and his brother Andrew, and James and John, Philip and Bartholomew, and Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon, who was called the Zealot, and Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. He came down with them and stood on a level place, with a great crowd of his disciples and a great multitude of people from all Judea, Jerusalem, and the coast of Tyre and Sidon. They had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases, and those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured. And all in the crowd were trying to touch him, for power came out from him and healed all of them. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. When I hear this story today, the story of Jesus calling this group of 12 disciples and naming them to be his apostles, one of the things that brings to my mind is this idea that Jesus was not the typical rabbi in his time. Now, we just heard yesterday how Jesus was already establishing that he wasn't the rabbi others expected him to be when he was going and talking about healing during the Sabbath, the man with the withered hand. So Jesus was already making a name for himself as a rabbi who didn't do things the typical way. Jesus also doesn't choose the typical kinds of disciples and ask them to be the apostles the typical way. The way that it would have usually worked in Jesus' time, a rabbi would have worked his way up the ranks of studying the scriptures, memorizing the scriptures, becoming an expert in them. And then once you rose to the level of being a rabbi, part of what you did was then you gathered other experts around you. You gathered other young people who were also able to memorize all of the Hebrew scriptures and become masters of the law, and to take them in as almost in a journeyman apprentice kind of relationship. Now, what Jesus does, Jesus looks out at this group of people, and does he choose the people who were the experts in their field? No. He chooses a couple of fishermen, Simon and Andrew, a couple of brothers who were fishermen, which probably means that they weren't experts at the law or the scriptures. They probably flunked out of school and joined the family trade if they were fishermen. Who else does he choose? He chooses James and John, a couple of business rivals, as you were, rival fishermen who very well could have been in an antagonistic relationship with Simon and Andrew over catching the fish in the same waters. And yet Jesus drew these two groups together and asked them to work together. Who else did he ask to work together? Well, he picked Matthew. He picked Matthew, who was a tax collector, basically an agent of the state, of government. And he picked Simon the Zealot, who was an anti-government figure, a revolutionary figure. He picked not just people who had great faith in him. He didn't just pick people who believed in him with all their heart, like Peter, and took the faith easily. He also took in people who struggled with it and wanted to wrestle with it more, like Thomas, who doubted, and even took in people like Judas Iscariot, who he knew would betray him. Jesus didn't gather around him the disciples who he knew would become the exact kind of rabbi that he was. He looked out into the world and saw real people living real lives with all of their faults, with all of their flaws, with all of the challenges that face us as real human beings in our lives. He saw within them that they could do the work that he needed them to do. they could be his disciples, and they could be his apostles, the people who he would then send out to gather in others and teach them to do the work that Jesus had given them to do. He taught a group of diverse and probably sometimes squabbling people, right? Much like people in our own world today. Jesus gathered them together and said, even in the midst of your differences, your different opinions, your different backgrounds, your different perspectives, even in the midst of that, you can carry my gospel message to go out into the world and proclaim God's love to the world, proclaim my promise of everlasting life to all who come to me. You can do this. And he was right. They did it. This ragtag group of miscreants who were not the Jewish experts in their world went out and they did it. And they changed the face of the world forever, which certainly gives me hope as I look around and I see our world today with all of our faults and flaws and the things we get wrong and our differences of opinions, that we too can hang on to this unifying message of Christ's love and to go out like apostles and share it with those around us. May thanks be to God for this lesson today. May you carry the blessing of God with you today and to all those who you love.